It's more than just steel and gears. It pulls you in and doesn't let go.
Okay, hello. Welcome to the Carousel with Will Hild.
Glad to be with you. This is awesome.
Welcome, Bill Hild, Wild Bill Hild. That's what
I have been called Wild many times in my life by accident. One time I was doing a panel and they accidentally printed my name as Wild Hild, and I was like, let's just change that legally right now. I will take that nickname.
Wild Hild. We got to make that stick. Okay, you are the world's foremost expert on a topic that a lot of people talk about and no one knows what the hell they're talking about ever, which is, oh my God, not Blackstone, BlackRock.
BlackRock.
Oh my God.
Right.
I did this again. All right, we're changing it. Sorry, we gotta just fix. I just fixed the title. It'll fix. The title will fix. Don't worry. But anyway, so you are here. Let me. Oh God, BlackRock, not Blackstone. So look. You went on the Good Old Boys podcast and talked all about what your organization does. Your organization is called, what is it? It is called
Consumers Research.
Consumers Research, which has actually been around since like 1927.
Yeah, depending on how you want to count it. I think the articles go back to 1929, but that was sort of before people formalized that type of thing. So I think it actually kind of started operating in like 1927. So we're coming up on 100 years.
Yeah. And so
I'm aging amazingly, by the way, clearly.
You are. You're 100 years old.
I'm the Pam Bondi of consumer protection.
What is going on with that?
Dude, I don't get into the adrenochrome rumor stuff, but if anybody's using it, geez.
It's a good surgeon, whoever her surgeon is.
Yeah.
She is killing it. I know you see these pictures, you're like, what?
I know.
But there's always something weird going on there, though. It's like Megyn Kelly kind of looks the same way, and it's like, what's really going on here? You know, it's like you feel like you're gonna see. You remember when that news reporter, the famous guy, got caught like pinning his like fire jacket behind him? Did you see
no,
that?
I didn't catch this.
Yeah,
what happened?
He's very big, but he's very like clearly kind of fruity, and he's like one of the biggest anchors, and he was reporting on the California fires, and his like fireman outfit looked like really well, like looked like tailored.
Oh, he had like pins back here, like
Yeah.
if I got my shirt, like did this kind of thing, right? Yeah. I did. I didn't catch the video on that, but I remember hearing like somebody laughing about like that happening to that guy.
Yeah, and it was like, bro, just wear it's
Right.
a fireman's outfit. You don't need to like make sure.
Yeah,
it's like
it doesn't need to look
like,
fitted.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want everybody to really understand that we're talking about BlackRock, not Blackstone. BlackRock derives from Blackstone. It came from Blackstone. It was Larry Fink and what's his name, Schwarzman?
Yeah. They left Blackstone. Excuse me. Larry Fink was working at Blackstone, and they got crossways with management, and so he went and started his own firm and named it BlackRock as, I don't know if it was like a middle finger or an homage. Like, it's kind of unclear now because they've made up, so they don't highlight that sort of portion of the history. But it's certainly related to Blackstone. But they're in they are both in the investment business, but they are in very, very separate wings of it. They don't interact in the way that like you would think, given how close their names are.
Yeah, which we'll get into like what the difference between them is in a second. Mm-hmm. I think Schwarzman still is Blackstone.
Yeah, he's still over there at Blackstone. It was Rob Capito and Larry who built BlackRock. And Rob Capito, if you guys remember, there was like some BlackRock executive that was like caught not on an open mic, it just in a private setting, and he said like, oh, the next generations are so, like the younger generations, meaning like millennials and even Gen X, are so entitled. They're used to going into stores and they're just being full shelves. I don't know if you vaguely remember that quote. That was Rob Capito. That wasn't Larry, but that was a different BlackRock founder that said that. He was actually an oil gas, kind of just a funny little backstory. He was at an oil and gas conference, which he may have been at because of our ads against them, because we have been attacking BlackRock for what they were doing to the oil and gas industry, raising prices. And all of a sudden, all these executives start getting these like speaking engagements at these oil and gas conferences, trying to kind of like glad hand and you know, act like, hey, we're not really hate you. And outside of that conference, actually, because we were following around these people around with guerrilla marketing, we're a bunch of local billboards attacking them. So there's a small way in which consumers research actually played a role in that sort of bad incident for them.
Well, I think, you know, the good old boys found you, and I think Bog Beef tells the story of how he found you, which was he was talking on a podcast, and he said, it's not like there's anybody out there who like studies or BlackRock all the time, you know, and then somebody responded, actually there is, and it's you. So it's great, because I've had this exact same thought a million times, like, why is there nobody out here that can tell us what BlackRock is doing?
Yeah, what does it do? How does it work? Right.
You know, every time you look at a stock portfolio, what do you see? You see the top shareholders, and it's BlackRock, Vanguard, and it's always like 8%, 4%. Yep. You know, like every stock. The listeners right now, go test it. Think of any company and go look at the top shareholders. I promise you, it will be BlackRock and Vanguard. Yep. So these are index funds, and an index fund is obviously very, very different than a hedge fund or a private equity fund, which is what Blackstone is.
Blackstone, or even a mutual fund. They're run very differently.
All right, so let's break this down. And what I really want to end up getting to is your description of how BlackRock influences the decision-making of the CEOs in the companies, which cause them to do horrible woke stuff, which drives everybody crazy. And, you know, that's kind of how we get to where we are today. And you do a very, very good job of explaining the part that people don't quite get. But let's start from the very beginning. What is BlackRock, and how is it different from Blackstone and Vanguard and blah, blah, blah?
Perfect. Well, the short version is they're asset managers, large passive asset managers. But of course, the devil's in like the details of the definitions of those terms, right? So, Babe, you'll allow me to do a short history lesson on sort of Wall Street and sort of the trends that have gotten us to 2025 and the way the market is structured. Wall Street originally was mostly active managers. People would give their money to people who manage funds. And that is what, like when you've seen like Gordon Gekko, right? Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko. That's what that person was doing. People had given him their money, and he was running around, you know, buy, sell. This is like boiler room. This is what you think of when you think of a stock trader shouting at a phone, right? That was an active manager. Now, I'm sure not all of them were such jackrabbits like they're usually made out to be. They're usually fairly anodyne people, but that was the idea. Warren Buffett, for example, is an active manager, right? He makes buying and selling decisions as to where they are going to put the money that they've been entrusted with. Starting in the 80s and the 90s, somebody whose name I should have right at the tip of my head, but I don't recall, basically came up with a body of research that said that the average fund manager, the average guy yelling buy and sell, loses to just a general basket of stocks. Like if you were just to go buy the entire S&P 500, the guy you picked to manage your money will do worse than that. And specifically, he'll do worse than that, not necessarily because he won't beat the market or at least break even with the market in some slight way, but you have to pay him a significant fee to manage your money. That fee is called an expense ratio. It's the percentage you gave someone $100. It's the number of dollars they take every year out of that 100 to pay themselves for managing your money. That's called an expense ratio. And once you factor in the expense ratio, in other words, the salary of the guy managing your money, the vast majority of these fund managers don't beat just the performance of the overall market. And that led to the development of something called the passive fund. And the passive fund basically does just that. It buys a broad swath of the market or whatever its subset is. So, for example, you could buy a passive fund that's a whole S&P, or you could buy an asset fund that's just every dairy company or every oil and gas company, right? They make subsets. In fact, there's now more passive index funds than there are assets to go into them. In other words, there are more ETFs or more exchange traded funds that are passive than there are stocks to go in the funds, because you can formulate them a million different ways. But the idea being that because it's just a computer buying regardless of the price and not making any kinds of investment decisions, those expense ratios, those fees that the fund charges, can come to almost zero, if not zero. And some now there are actually companies that offer zero expense ratio exchange traded funds because they're trying to get, it's like a loss leader. They want the customer base to come to them, right? And so that has led towards tons and tons of money flowing from people actively engaging in buying and selling and being price sensitive, meaning if they see something that's expensive, they sell it. And if they see something that's cheap, they buy it. Towards more and more money being in passive funds where the machine does not care. If you give it $100, it goes into the market and buys $100 worth of shares, right? It doesn't care what the price is. It has a list of stocks and it just spreads your money, not evenly because it's weighted by the size of the companies, called market cap. But basically it buys according to a schedule, and it's not making any kind of investment decisions in terms of, I don't like this stock, I like this one over here, right?
Okay, so to just de-jargonify this.
Right.
At some point in the finance history, it used to be you had to actively manage other people's money. Then, when did this happen? There was a law passed.
No, it was more like research. It was more like somebody figured out a better mousetrap. And
okay, so this wasn't a legal thing.
Yeah, money just started flowing out of these active managers into these
passive managers.
Yeah.
So it wasn't any sort of law that allowed this to happen. You could have been a passive manager the whole time. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
And the reason why people like passive managers is because it's cheaper. Because you don't have to pay the management fee. Because obviously you're not paying a full-timer. You're just paying a computer. You're basically paying a computer to just invest your money. It doesn't change. So you're saving a lot of money on the cost of the management of your money. Is that right?
Exactly. 100% correct. And just to give some understanding of how big the magnitudes were when this shift started, the average fund manager, I don't know exactly what it was in the 80s, but it was not uncommon for a fund manager to charge you $1.50 for every $100 he was managing, so 1.5%, or even 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Someone
it was 2 and 20. Was it whatever happened to 2 and 20? Wasn't that?
2 and 20 was a common, right? If you were doing that kind of like hedge fund manager, it was 2 and 20, meaning 2% of all the money, no matter what happens, and then 20% of their overperformance of the S&P 500. So if they did really well, they got an additional cut of your money over that.
So that's a hedge fund, and that's like Blackstone.
Exactly. That's what Blackstone focuses on, is those actively managed funds, which have kind of like, people don't even use the word hedge fund as much anymore. That's usually PE, private equity. That's sort of what they're referring to, the remnants of the active managed fund industry, which, don't get me wrong, there's still trillions of dollars in active management. But as a percentage of the market, of the percentage of the funds invested, they've become a smaller and smaller portion every year because, like I said, you might have to pay 2 and 20 to a fund manager. An ETF might charge you 0.1. In other words, 10 cents for every $100 that they're managing. So we're talking about magnitudes of 1/20th of the fees that you'd pay an active manager, or even less, in order to put your money in the broad swath of stocks.
Yeah, in the S&P 500. And then you're weighting based on how much the market cap is of each of those on those 500. And you don't have to worry about it because, hey, somebody else has already done the work of deciding which stocks go in the S&P 500, and they're all very safe. It's all like, hey, you're never going to lose any of these things. So why are you paying some a-hole to move money around just for the sake of it, which is basically what you were doing. So you can't really blame, especially these institutional investors or just like your everyday mom and pop investor, you can't blame them for wanting to use passive because what does it matter anyway? The stock market always goes up. Who cares? Yeah,
no, not at all. It was probably a good move for the vast majority of consumers because if you're not really if you don't know enough about stock investing to be picking the stocks, you probably don't know enough about stock investing to pick the guy who picks your stock,
to be picking your guy. Yeah,
right.
it's like I always
It's
remember
like the
my
whole
family.
mechanic at you, right? Like if you don't know enough to fix your car, your mechanic can sell you on pretty much anything because you don't know enough to fix your car. So what are you gonna like? If he tells you something's wrong, you're just gonna go, okay, cool.
Yeah, and how many people's family has the Morgan Stanley guy? Let me call the Morgan Stanley guy.
Exactly.
And the Morgan Stanley guy is some like complete schmuck whose like entire job is to just answer the phone from old ladies and like doesn't know the first friggin' thing about trade. Like he's not doing anything. He's just like talking jargon on the phone and being like, "I got you, Susie. Like don't worry about it."
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, what's funny about that particular industry is the people that are the financial advisors. All of the large asset managers like BlackRock and State Street, they have people whose job it is to talk to those people and give them a bunch of stuff to say about the market to their clients. Like, our analysis shows that this is going to go up and this is going to go down, blah, blah, blah. Because those people, I'm not saying, don't come at me here. But the vast majority of financial advisors don't really know what the market is.
They don't know anything.
Right,
I always remember,
right?
yeah.
Your job is to like call little old ladies all day, right? And like be friends, send you a nice birthday note, right? So
I always remember my mom just being like, would always just like show up at the dinner, like not at the dinner table because we didn't have one, but she would always just suddenly be like, I really think we should invest in Duke Energy. I've been really thinking about this, and it's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, wait, you don't even know. You don't even know what that is. Like, you don't like where are you getting these?
You probably got it from a financial advisor.
No,
and
definitely,
a financial advisor probably got it from BlackRock or State Street because they use that relationship to encourage financial advisors to encourage their clients to get into BlackRock funds. So they'll say like, oh, we think the next 6 months is going to be defined by like higher inflation, and a good product for a higher inflation environment is the BlackRock high inflation ETF or whatever. Yeah. So it's a way of them to they help the financial advisors sound smart to their clients. And in return, the financial advisors kind of push them into the products from those representatives. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Totally. So anyway, that's a little aside about what goes on in that space. But yeah, this isn't an attack on anyone moving to passive. It's probably been an overall very good thing for the vast majority of consumers. But where this feeds into the power that large asset managers like namely BlackRock have, but there are others, is that this all lends towards economies of scale. It's actually really hard to manage, like actively manage super large sums of money. Like if I gave you $50 billion to invest, it's going to be really difficult because think how often you would like how many different places you would need to put that money and how many different companies you need to be thinking about, right? But actually, it's really easy to passively manage $50 billion. It's like perfect because now even 0.1% of $50 billion gives you all the money you need to put a computer together to make the buys and the sells and still have a lot left over for profit. So that's driven the expense ratios for passive down, and the economies of scale have led towards the biggest players being able to price the most competitively. And so it's, in other words, bigger encourages it to become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's sort of a self-licking ice cream cone in terms of big. And so you've ended up with these massive, to take it all the way back to how you opened the discussion, that's how you end up with looking up like, oh, who controls the top percentage shares of like Coca-Cola? And it's the same three people. If you check that or Nike or American Airlines or anything, right? It's BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, usually in that order. There's some little variations here and there, but the vast majority of the time, it's going to be those three in that order. And that's where that power comes from when you talk about how that works. But that's how you get to that beginning point you mentioned, where that's the order.
Right. And you're saying just for the sake of economies of scale, the inertia when it comes to being a competitive passive investor is to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
That's what you want to do because why not?
Let's think about it. There's no differentiation on the investment. The S&P 500 fund at BlackRock is the same at Morgan Stanley. It's got the same stuff it is at State Street. Like it's the same list of stocks. Like there's zero difference, right?
Right.
But so the one thing they can compete on is price, and so they just move towards
just goes down and down and down and down and down. Right. Exactly. It's like people always talk about, well, what price of what has gone down? And actually, like probably the price of the thing that has gone down the most is asset management fees.
Right.
You know, that's bottomed out.
That's a good point. I never thought of it. Yeah. It's up there with like flat panel television from South Korea. Like that's it's down like 95%.
Yeah, right. Flat panel TVs, asset match. Okay, so then we have this seemingly innocent thing going on. Mm-hmm. So how does it turn dark?
Yes.
It turned
So
black.
what's weird, and this is very counterintuitive,
Rock.
but the passive managers end up being in a position where they have to more actively manage the companies that they own. And the reason for that is if you are an active manager and you decide that a company isn't doing very well, okay, or is about to not be doing very well, the easiest thing for you to do, right, isn't to like go into management and complain and threaten to replace them, because to aggregate that much to get control of the corporation is very difficult. The people who do it have to specialize in that alone, like people like Paul Singer and David Ackman and Carl Icahn. They're called activist investors, and even they don't ever usually get 50% of the company. They get like 5%, and then they threaten a bunch and try to get other people on their side, right? Like it's very difficult. So most active managers, if they didn't like a company, like I'm talking like 90%, 95% of active managers, they didn't like a company, they just sold it. They don't own it anymore, right? It's not their problem, right? Passive managers don't have that ability. They can't sell anything. If it's in the S&P 500, they have to own it, and they have to own it in the amounts that the S&P 500 weights things, right? So they end up controlling all the shares of these stocks, and there's votes every year for like re-electing the board members of these companies, for voting up or down on their compensation package. This has kind of come into the news lately with Elon Musk. You know, he had a compensation package that was approved by the shareholders, and then that activist Delaware judge said, "Isn't there someone you forgot to ask?" and said like, "No, we don't really, we don't." And then the shareholders voted on it again, and then she said, "Well, but they didn't ask me." And so now, like, I mean, she may very well sink the whole Delaware grift that they had going with the everyone registering there because of one crazy judge. But that's the kind of thing that these asset managers have to vote on. And they also occasionally, activists will put on shareholder proposals, and this would be something like, I want the company to produce a report on the potential downsides to the company if their oil rig off of the coast of Bolivia was to have like a BP style leak, okay? And the reason you do this isn't because, generally speaking, these people actually want a report on the downsides. They're making a political point. Like, for example, Levi's often gets like a PETA complaint. Like, they want to look at the, what the ramifications of the company would be if they were to move away from natural leather and move to like fake leather or something like that. It's basically a way to nudge the company on a political issue. And they have to vote on these as well. And they are literally legally required to vote on these things because the vote is considered part of the property interest with the stock itself. So if you don't vote, unless you have certain specific circumstances, you could theoretically get sued. So they're sitting on top of all these shares, and they have to make decisions. I'll grant them that. They have to vote. What they don't have to do is decide that they are going to start, as a rule, pushing the companies along a certain political agenda. And so the way that works, hold on.
Okay, we just entered the new phase here. So let's break this down again. So we started out talking about the shift from active management to passive management. Now you have these passive managers that are massive. They are huge.
Yeah, I think BlackRock's up to like $11 trillion under management.
Yeah, they are managing $11 trillion, more money than you could ever possibly imagine. They are managing. So how are they managing it? They're managing it because they don't actually manage it. They manage it because they're just a computer.
Exactly. They're not managing it.
Yeah, they're not doing it. Right. They just put it in the S&P 500. They put it in some pre-existing financial product that's researched by somebody else.
Exactly.
And this saves all the investors money. So the Pennsylvania, retarded kids who can't read good school union puts their one like $100 million patronage union due money amount of money. They put that into BlackRock, and it just sits there. And BlackRock invests it, but passively. They don't even actually invest it. They're the sort of the middleman between S&P 500, these sort of pre-existing financial instruments, and that fund. So essentially, nobody ever talks about Vanguard for some reason, but let's just focus on BlackRock. BlackRock just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows till it gets huge. It's managing every pile of money in the world. It is being managed by BlackRock because it's so cheap to invest with it.
Correct. 100%. I should mention, though, just real quick, those big piles you refer to are usually referred to as institutional investors.
Sure, yes.
So a lot, like, it's not so much, and BlackRock does do 401k management. So people who have like a private brokerage account or a retirement account through their company, they do that business. But the big pools, the things that like get them up to 11 trillion, aren't that. It's the university endowment funds. It's the state pension funds. So like your teachers' pension funds, your firefighters, your cops, your state employees. That's where they, and in fact, BlackRock manages the vast majority of the federal thrift savings plan, which is the federal pension fund. So you're 100% right. The typical customer that's coming in with tons and tons of money to get add up to $11 trillion isn't like an individual wealthy billionaire. It is these big pools of public capital, of
public money. So it's a weird public-private thing. Is it bound by nations at all?
No, in fact, that's
totally
a great point,
unbound.
One of the things that pushed BlackRock in this direction, and that's not to let them off the hook on that, because someone shouldn't be able to pay you to break the law. But one of the things that pushed them in this direction was some of the large sovereign wealth funds. Trump is now talking about America having a sovereign wealth fund. Some countries they take the profits, like the trade. We have a trade deficit. A lot of companies have a trade surplus with us. They'll take the surplus from that, and instead of giving a check to everybody, they will create an investment fund. So it's like a private brokerage account, but for the country, right? And so Japan, for example, and Norway, there's lots of them. There's lots of countries that have them. Saudis have them. But two very important ones are the Japanese sovereign wealth fund and the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund. And both of those funds at one point, and this is getting a little bit ahead, but they said that in order to take us on as a customer, we're going to need to see asset managers who will commit to use all of their assets under management. So not just the money we give you, but the money that everyone else has given you to push net zero, which is this net zero carbon emissions. If anyone knows anything about the climate change debate.
Surprised Japan does that, because it's who harasses the Japanese whalers the most is the stupid environmental people. So you'd think that they would. But anyway, hold on. You're saying something. I want to get to that. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, the Teachers Union of Pittsburgh is having their money managed by the same group as the entire country of Japan, which is completely insane.
I don't know that, like, the sovereign wealth fund is probably not all in BlackRock. They probably didn't hand the whole thing over.
Of course. I'm just saying some
of it, basically, yeah.
And what's really insane is that I can't believe that this is allowed. This should not be allowed. There shouldn't be allowed to be one entity that does this with different countries, in my opinion. But anyway, that's for another time. But okay, so we have these massive things. Now, normally, as you just said, a active investor, when they don't like that the CEO of X company is doing something dumb, or they don't like the rules that are being passed in that company, their primary recourse is to simply sell out of that company. They're like, okay, I'm cashing out. I don't like this. I'm an active investor. If I'm active, I don't like what that company is doing. My recourse is to sell the stock and go to a different company. A passive investor doesn't have that luxury because it's locked in. It can't sell because that would make it active. So because it's just existing, it has to automatically invest. The one thing it can do, however, is since it owns a bunch of shares that it doesn't really own a bunch of shares. It owns it on behalf of its pool of money. Yeah, but it does get to vote on those shares, and vote meaning vote on various proposals inside the company.
Board of directors, the compensation packages for the executive.
And I think you put it exactly, the best way to think about it is the CEO compensation package. Mm-hmm. So Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, basically kind of stumbles into this position of being able to vote a large percentage of the shares on the CEO compensation. So suddenly there's this guy in the room who's supposed to be a passive investor, but he does have the power to influence the CEO pay.
Right. He actually, ironically, becomes the least passive investor. Because if you're an active investor that doesn't like the company, 9 times out of 10, you're just going to disappear. You will no longer have any connection to the company whatsoever when you sell. Right. But with Larry, even though he got all of his stock is from passive investing, he becomes somebody who you always have to deal with.
Yes, because he can screw you up if there's a vote on your compensation package,
Right.
he can
Right.
say, I'm going to take my 7% of the votes. It's a governance problem. He's going to say, I have 7% of the votes. If I say no, that means you don't get your compensation package. Is
Right.
that right?
Right. And even worse, we'll get into this, but the the passive funds, the asset managers know each other. And up until just recently, like literally like last month, they were part of a consortium called the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance, NZAM. And so they were coordinating. So not just if you ticked off Larry Fink, but if you weren't like enough along on your net zero plan, you have now effectively ticked off a cartel of State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock, and there were hundreds of signatories to this thing, which just to be clear, I believe that's a illegal cartel. There's this lawsuit out of Texas alleging the same. So if people are sitting there going, wait, that doesn't sound legal, that can't be the case. I agree with you. That doesn't sound legal. That shouldn't be the case. And shortly after Texas and a bunch of other states sued them, it stopped being the case. But that was for the last 10 years, basically, or maybe it was 8 since NZAM started. That has been what corporate managers have been up against when they are getting pressure from people like Larry Fink. It's not just Fink. It's that there's a lot of other asset managers colluding with each other.
Yes, 100%. And so, right, you're not only having the pressure from Larry Fink, you're having the pressure from all of his friends who have decided to get together. Mm-hmm. My question that I actually don't know the answer to, when it comes to something like a CEO package, say it was just Larry Fink by himself and BlackRock owns 7%, 10%, is that really enough to sink a CEO compensation package vote? Right.
That's a great question. I get that all the time because it doesn't sound like much, right? Like 7% doesn't get you anywhere near 51, right? And the reason it does is because a couple things. One, that 7 or 8% or 9% is going to be the single largest block of capital or shares voting together. Like that speaks with one voice, right? To it's self definitional, right? If it's the largest block, it's the single largest block voting together. The other problem is if you're voting on a compensation package, you don't want to be squeaking over. It's not like a presidential race. You don't want to win by 50.1% or whatever. Like that is a really bad sign. Like you basically should retire if you hit 50, if you get right over the line. It's over. In fact, when you're running board of director re-elections, if it starts to look like a board of directors starts to get 90%, 80%, 70%, even though in a political election that would be an absolute landslide, if they start seeing that happen, they will find a convenient reason why that board of directors is going to be rotating off the board. They do not like for reasons that are too tedious to get into. They do not like to see anything, shy of like a 90, 95% for these things. If another reason, like look at what's happened to Elon, as I mentioned before, you don't want to give anyone daylight to do a shareholder derivative suit and have someone sue on behalf of the company to say, I don't think this executive actually should get this, even though it was voted on by they'll come up with some reason why the investors were misled and they'll sue. So you really need to be closer to 100 than you do to 50, or you're really in trouble. And that's part of the reason that they have the problem. The other reason, and this is one thing I didn't cover in the Good Old Boys podcast that we ran out of time to cover, and we can just set it aside if this gets into we haven't even finished BlackRock yet. But the other reason is there is a industry called proxy advisors. The vast majority of asset managers aren't as big as BlackRock. BlackRock does all its voting internally, right? It has people for that to decide how they're going to vote. But most fund managers, active or passive, aren't that big, and they don't want to deal with it. And there's a law that basically allows them a safe harbor provision, like meaning they can't be sued for how they vote if they offload it to one of these proxy advisory firms. And there's really only two. There's basically two options: Glass Lewis, ISS.
Wait, you're getting cut off. Your sound is getting screwed up.
How's that? Is that any better?
Yeah, better. Okay, sorry. There's two proxy voting companies.
There's two proxy advisors, and all proxy advisors mean is they advise other funds on how to vote. And because of the way the SEC has structured the safe harbor provisions, if you don't want to deal with it, you can just pay ISS or Glass Lewis to vote your shares, and you don't have to deal with it anymore. And you're not really culpable for how they vote. In other words, if they screw it up, it's like, it's like if you ever had an accountant do your taxes, at the end they sign so that if the IRS comes after somebody, like you may have to pay the missing taxes, but you won't go to jail. Like the accountant. It's like that, right? The advisors are stepping in and saying, listen, we're the ones.
We'll take the liability. Yeah.
So those companies, in a weird self-licking ice cream cone controversy, I think honestly ought to be a much bigger deal than it is. You would think that they would hire like financial analysts, to like people with bow ties, and they'd be like in there crunching numbers, like what does this executive earn and what is he worth and blah, blah, blah. That's not how their stuff works. They form committees called public policy committees, or I should say policy committees, not public policy, policy committees that are made up of influential members of the market, like BlackRock.
I see. Yeah. So
and they
just
poll basically in a group what those people are doing, what the top minds in the market are doing, and that's how they form their advice. So if you are an executive and BlackRock walks in and says, we don't like your failure to set a net zero standard, or you're farther behind, not only do you know that they're walking in with 9 or 10% of your company, but you know they're saying the same thing to ISS and Glass Lewis and to all their other friends at Net Zero Asset Managers, RIP, you won't be missed. So it's not just like, it's a weird thing where even though they are not overall a huge portion, because they're the largest portion, they speak with this huge voice. And you have to be very worried about what BlackRock is saying to you and to other people about your company, namely ISS and Glass Lewis.
Yeah, so it's like a tyranny of the middleman thing. It's like it's somebody who's come in here. It's very similar with CAA and WME in entertainment. It's like these people who've come in and actually no one wants them. It's like they're not actually there. They've sort of snuck in as a middleman that's supposedly passive and helpful and totally unelected, totally unpaid for.
Yep.
And then suddenly, next thing you know, they're friends with all the other middlemen, and then whoops, we actually control everything. And the company,
this is spot on. Like if you've ever read James Burnham's Managerial Revolution, this is the ultimate tyranny of the managerial class. Like they have, especially in this particular space of ESG, completely detach themselves using the principal agent problem, right? Because it's not just their principal agent. It's like principal agent. So to give you an example, like with the pension funds, for example, the ultimate like beneficiary, right, is like the retired school teacher, right? But she's not the person that manages the fund. She doesn't get to call BlackRock and say, I don't want you managing my money or you're screwing up or whatever. The money is managed by a group of trustees, right? And these are made up of all different ways. I actually had someone research it in any way you could conceive of making up this board. Elected, appointed by different, the governor gets somebody, the AG gets a pick, whatever. Like you'll find some configuration of this. So there's no like one set of way that these trustees are chosen. But in general, they're either elected or appointed, right? But that's a principal agent problem, right? Because you're not the teacher, that you're the trustee, right?
Tell people what the principal agent problem is.
So the principal agent problem is that, let's say you hire someone to like sell your house for you, okay? And they're going to get like a percentage of the house sale. But they need to obviously sell more than one house a year unless you're like a billionaire, they're going to need to like sell a bunch of houses. So their incentives are speed. They want transactions, boom, boom, boom. You want top dollar for your house. Now, I know this isn't like the real estate agents on the line. Don't like come at me. I get it. Like days on listing is bad for a thing. It's also often in the interest of a person selling the house to get it done quickly. However, sometimes it's good to wait. Sometimes it's like, hey, like let's not take our first offer here. Let's wait. Let's keep the thing on the market. It's getting interest, but we just haven't gotten across the line yet, right? You have a divergent interest with you're the principal. Meaning you principally own the home. Your agent is the real estate agent. That's why I chose the analogy. His interests are to get you to sell for slightly less, right? But just get it done. Because let's say you reduce the cost of the house by 10% to get it sold. That costs him pennies because he's only getting 5% of the sale price. But it costs you a lot. It costs you 10%. And so you have slightly divergent interests, which is why it's good to find like a good agent that you can trust that kind of understands that and is like not trying to screw you over. And it's part of the reason that agents don't always have the best reputation, right? Because there is this disconnect. So principal agent problems are anytime there's a difference between the person whose asset is being managed or sold or whatever, and the person doing the managing, doing the selling. And that is the exact issue you have with BlackRock. BlackRock doesn't own any of these stocks for their own sake. Like, it's not their money. It's not Larry Fink's money. It is a teacher in Ohio who's 70 and retired. It's that person's money. But that person doesn't even have a direct relationship with BlackRock. They can't call and say, you've screwed me. I'm done, right? Like, I'm moving to Morgan Stanley. They may have to call their governor and say, the trustee you appointed, along with the other trustees that the attorney general and the treasurer in my state appointed, aren't holding BlackRock accountable, right? So you have layers. You have, like, from the beneficial from the principal, you have an elected official, then a trustee, then BlackRock. Before you, like, there's so little accountability because there's no direct relationship. And that is why you had, to your point, this is like the managerial class has completely detached themselves from, like, direct accountability, and they can kind of just do what they want. And they, because of this weird active to passive thing, ended up holding a ton of power over all of corporate America, which is effectively the U.S. economy.
Yeah. It's so crazy. It's so, it's like, in entertainment, it's a little more, like, acceptable to have this, like, kind of middle layer because you need it for curation. But it's like, in this case, these people seem completely, like, a passive investor should be a passive investor. They should not be screwing around with the policy of the company. So in any case, what ends up happening is they have this big seat on the board because they own all these shares that have been passively invested. Nobody thinks Larry Fink's going to show up and start telling people what to do, but as soon as he can do that, of course he does do that.
Right.
So what he should be telling these companies to do is to make more money, right? But instead, what does he do?
Well, what's funny is he will couch all of his advice because he's a legal fiduciary duty. He doesn't want to get sued. He will say, that's all I'm doing. I'm just telling them how to make more money. But the ways in which he will tell them to make more money just happen to align one for one with the far left wing of the Democratic Party platform, right? What a coincidence, right? Like, it always turns out that doing the most far left progressive thing is the best thing for your bottom line, right? And to give you, like, some concrete examples, there was an interview with DealBook, which is this New York Times property where they interview on TV big, Wall Street executives. And they had Kenneth Chenault, the then, now I guess he was already retired, the then CEO of Amex, who had just stepped out and retired. And they had Larry Fink. And this was, kind of in the lead up. This wasn't, like, quite George Floyd BLM. This was like 2017, but we'd had the first round of it. And they were asking him about representation. And obviously they meant, like, DEI and that kind of thing. And that's where that infamous quote that you probably have seen where he talks about forcing behaviors. Like, I was
thinking about trying to play it, but I should have brought it up beforehand. But keep going. Yeah, Larry Fink basically said we need to force behaviors.
Right. At BlackRock,
one of the behaviors he forced, the one thing you've left out of all of your Larry Fink stuff?
What's that?
He discovered the band Maroon 5.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
Wow, you are really, I'm glad you're enlightening me. How did that happen?
So of all the horrible things he's unleashed upon the world,
one more thing to
Adam Levine, by far the worst. No, he was like some creepy investor of some entertainment thing, and Maroon 5 was at the time called, like, Lila's Flowers or something, Kiki's Flowers or some shit.
Oh my God.
And Larry Fink basically, and this, like, creepy entertainment hedge fund, whatever, speaking of manipulating people, like, came in and, like, formed Maroon 5 into Maroon 5. Like, they changed the name, they changed all the, like, the sound and the aesthetic, and they created Maroon 5. But anyway, so sorry.
I just have Kiki's Flowers. However,
it was something. It's not Kiki's, so something Flowers. And but okay, yeah. So here, actually, let's just watch this. Let's watch Larry tell us about. Wait, let me just make. Is this going to play some ad if I play this? Hold on.
Yeah, it usually does.
Yes, it is. Fuck that. Sure. All right. Yeah, never mind. So anyway, Larry Fink says.
At BlackRock, we believe that for behaviors to change, behaviors are going to be have to be forced to change. And at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors to change. Now, that's usually what gets clipped because brevity is always worthwhile on the internet.
All right, wait. Okay, let's just watch it.
You got it? Sorry. Okay, let's watch it. You've got it muted.
Oh.
Yep.
Behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing.
Wait, let me turn him up here a little bit.
Turn the volume up there.
He really Fink is what is Merrick said Fink is the perfect name. What is a Fink?
Could
is
you
a
believe
Fink
what is the philosophy
Looks
where
like a
things are
rat.
like nomalism or something like that, where things fit their name?
Yeah, it's a nominative determinism.
Yeah,
I think
nominative
is what they
determinism.
call it. What is a Fink though? I don't even know what a Fink is.
I think it means a traitor.
Oh my god.
Oh, we're gonna hit you with the.
Oh, Fox.
Why does every news site have the
here we
worst embedded web player?
We're asking companies, you have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. What we are doing internally is, if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay? You have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted.
Wow.
Yeah.
I bet he regrets that one.
I've certainly worked hard to make it.
Bet old Larry Fink wishes he did not, do the big bump that he did before getting on stage that time, or whatever adrenochrome hooker
He was really feeling himself that day.
Yeah.
Really feeling himself.
So, all right. So what? Okay. So tell us what we're saying here.
Yeah. So what he's saying there, and that even wasn't in the total full clip, because he talks about we're looking at this across every company we're invested in, which is we've just belabored for the last 45 minutes, is every company that's publicly traded because of the nature of passive investing. He's saying that like this is what we're doing to them. In other words, we're going to start affecting your compensation if we don't see the makeup of your team, meaning their C-suites and their boards, or maybe even the full makeup of the entire company, look the way that BlackRock has decided that it needs to look. So he didn't use the word, but what he's basically saying is we're setting race and sex-based quotas, right, for your boards, or even sexual orientation there. There's sort of an allusion to that. I mean, this is full DEI. This is like you're going to have 30% this and 15% this and 12% this, or we're going to affect your compensation. We're going to force behaviors. We're going to change your team. And I know from a fact because
you might be impacted.
Yeah,
you may be impacted. Yeah. You could see that in an email,
right? Might be.
It's
impacted.
like, hey, CEO, whatever. You may be impacted if you do not.
That's a great point. I never caught that, but that is some real. That's some real like feminist
circle back,
feminist style like HRism, right?
Like, You may.
Yeah, he's not saying
impacted.
we're going to fire you. He's not saying like you're done. It's very like you may be affected, right?
Yeah, you might be impacted a little later.
Exactly.
It's okay. So the big why, of course, and let's not go into too much darkness here, but why is he doing this?
Yeah,
that's the big question. And then let's talk about the solution, because I think the solution, I don't know. I mean, I think what you're doing obviously is one of them, but why the hell does Larry? I mean, look, I want to be fair. He is on stage with New York Times. Right. So if he's as much of a Fink as Larry Fink is, and he's just a complete, I'll say anything to get power, maybe he's just telling the New York Times what it wants to hear also, right? But we know for a fact that he does actually institute these ridiculous quotas of race and all this stuff. So why? And also, I also just want to say, before I forget to say, I've actually met some CEOs of some of these companies. A lot of times I've met CEOs of like the under company that's part of a parent, or like but brands you've heard of. I've met them. A lot these CEOs aren't what you would think of as CEOs. They're not like the CEO of maybe the parent's parent company. Maybe is that, but a lot of times the CEO of a company is actually like a middle manager type themselves. They're not actually. These are
not the Randy and Ubermenches that we imagine. These titans of industry, right?
They're kind of like paper pusher types. They're kind of like just I went to the right schools. I know the right people. I'm a woman, or I'm whatever, and I like that's why you see a lot of these. Company, like when the company that you've heard of like kind of gets taken over by like a random Indian guy, it's usually like, nothing against that. I'm not saying this like racially. I'm just saying it's like there are many Indian people who are very capable of starting their own businesses. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the middle manager type that kind of is like that.
Well, I can let you off the hook here, and I can say it if you'd like me to.
Okay, you say.
So the question of why, and the reason why is, as you said, absolutely there's truth to the fact that there are good Indian entrepreneurs or managers, and there's good women who can be like. I'm not taking the idea that like, oh, women don't belong in the workplace or blacks or something like that.
I mean, they don't, but
that said,
blacks belong. No.
When you owe Larry Fink your position, meaning you only got there because he was able to put you there under the guise of DEI, right?
Yeah.
He owns you, right?
Then
like,
Daddy doesn't even need to say. Daddy doesn't even need to say you might be impacted because you already know.
Exactly.
You already know that. Yeah.
So it's not that anyone is saying anyone's anti-DEI, anti-ESG that like as you always said, like you refuse to accept that blacks can't fly airplanes. I've heard you say that a million times on your podcast, right?
That's true.
So no one's taking that position, but if you're trying to force certain people in because they hit a certain demographic that you've claimed you're like, I'm here to save blacks from being underrepresented, right? So I get to put my friend Charlie on this board and I get to put my friend Sue on this board. Well, Charlie and Sue belong to you. I didn't mean to go all Dr. Seuss there on the rhyme, but like they effectively answer to Larry Fink because they know that they didn't get there on their own merits, right? And that isn't to say that a black person or a woman couldn't get there on their own merits, but it probably wouldn't have been that one, right? And that's the issue. And that's part of the motivation is that it basically, not only does Larry already control these companies' shares, but allows them to have a significant portion of the board that is only there because they were hitting some sort of race and sex-based quota, which is the problem with DEI in general, right? Like, again, it's not that we need to be discriminating against any of these groups, but when you discriminate for any group, you start selecting for things other than merit and competency and skill. And what you're really selecting for in that point, it's not stated this way, right? We think we're selecting for race or sex, but what we're really selecting for is political loyalty to the left. And that's the real point of DEI, right? Is that people know that they didn't get there on their own merits, and therefore they owe a different master their loyalty. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, because there's other things that BlackRock is doing, like net zero and that kind of thing. But that's why it's so advantageous for Larry himself to be pushing this kind of thing, thinks he's going to force behaviors, is because it's a way for him to aggregate more power. And he, in turn, what he gets out of it is that without going through the tedious history of his career, there's been a number of times, major times, where he has benefited greatly from beneficial treatment from governments, both here and abroad. And for example, you remember the movie The Big Short? They do a little flashback to the beginning of the creation of mortgage-backed securities. And it's like people in like 80s ties, right? They've like, it's just a real quick, like it's some guy with a projector screen and he's like running numbers and everything like that. Larry was in that room. Larry helped make mortgage-backed securities. Like to your point, like I guess he went from there to renaming Maroon 5. But he helped develop that asset class. And I'm not, whether he was at fault for that or I don't know. But like when the whole thing blew up in 2008, because of that, he was called in to help with that. And as they were figuring out part of what happened with TARP, with the Toxic Asset Release Program and the collapse of these mortgage-backed securities, wasn't that they were all bad. It's that because they hadn't really been policed, we didn't know which ones were bad and which ones weren't. And he was brought in, and BlackRock was brought in to help parse the good assets from the bad assets. And lo and behold, who gets a really juicy slice of the best assets coming out of that arrangement is BlackRock. And in fact, he had, I think, been a subsidiary of Merrill Lynch at the time. And as part of this arrangement, that's when BlackRock becomes its own entity and goes off and to what it is now. So he's also, without beating a dead horse, like he's gotten a lot of favorable treatment from the Treasury. I'm sorry to say, under the first Trump administration, him and Mnuchin were like super, super tight. He got a ton of favors after that, over that. And so and Mnuchin, of course, is famously the one, or maybe not the only Democrat, but probably the most far left Democrat on Trump's first cabinet, which I'm glad to say he corrected with Bessent, who I think is great. But he's gotten favors in China. He's the only, at one point at least, I have to go check to see if this is still true, but they were the only foreign-owned, meaning foreign to China, owned company that could manage mutual funds on mainland China, and specifically pension funds, which is kind of ironic. So in terms of what's in it for him, he seeks to make deals with power, and so he acts as sort of their puppet, right? And then he, in turn, turns all these companies into his puppet through DEI and net zero and all this corporate engagement lobbying and that kind of thing that we've talked about. So that's sort of the arrangement. And that's why you mentioned Good Old Boys. Like, I mean, they've really been like one of the most important podcasts that I've listened to over the last 5 years because their big thing is patronage.
Yeah.
And like ESG, it sounds like this crazy, wonky, like, bow tie economist Wall Street thing. But at the core, it's a patronage network. It's a way of like providing loyalty in return.
But is that really why? Is that really why?
I mean,
because
you could. I think he's a lifelong Democrat from California.
Look, it is. But isn't the point of Good Old Boys that it's going to be a patronage network no matter what? It's going to be a patronage network no matter what you do.
Right.
The issue people take is not that Wall Street and all these companies is a patronage network. The issue is that they're trying to get you to chop your dick off. That's what they don't like. They don't care if you're trying to, show that. I mean, look, they care a little bit. I mean, remember when the left actually cared about money? Yeah, sure. Back then, it was like the guys in suits, and then against the guys in suits were the guys in like the black bloc, Antifa,
right.
And
through Starbucks,
right, and then it was like, oh well, we hate these guys in suits,
right.
But for the most part, your everyday average American was completely fine with the people on the TV telling you to buy stuff and wear suits and, or buy a Coke to do yoga. Even that was fine. Whatever rebellion they were selling you, that's why I did the episode yesterday. Whatever rebellion they were selling you, it was whatever. Okay. The big deal. Rap music. Okay.
Yeah.
The thing that went wrong is the insanity of wokeness, right? I mean, this seems extremely obvious, but what doesn't make any sense to me at all is why the hell would Larry Fink, I'm talking about the substance of the corruption, why would he make it this? Why would he want it to be so subversive and gross and anti-white and why would he do that?
Yeah. I can't prove that this is the case, and we may not. I mean, unless the Democratic Party radically shifts its platform, we won't know. I think he's not really part of that. I think whatever was put on the far left Democratic platform and became the party song sheet, he would have sung that song. If they had decided that the most important thing for corporate America to be doing was, silly hat Fridays, he would have been strong-arming every corporate CEO in America to demand that they were doing silly hat Fridays, sometimes on Thursdays. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't have. I'm not saying he may not have a true political position. I'm sure that he does. What's funny about that is he can't even argue this with me, because if he was to say, like, no, that's not true, I sincerely believe this, then he would actually be admitting that he was violating his fiduciary duty and just pushing.
Right, that's a great point,
he
right?
Has
because
to pretend that that's not what he's doing.
He has to pretend that it's
good
for
business. Right, he just ran the numbers, and this is how it worked out, guys. So the funny thing is he can't even differ with this, because
he's not
can't
an
claim
idiot.
that he's a true believer. It would undermine
there's
his argument.
no way in hell he actually believes that. He's not dumb. He can't be that dumb. I mean, some of these people are that dumb. Right. You saw what happened with Elizabeth Holmes, which very, very, very smart people who should have known better got sucked in by that. But Larry Fink seems like a smart guy to me. So I don't think that he could possibly actually think that gutting your business on the basis of race is a good idea. But I mean, like, unless he thinks it's that you can pay them less or
I don't think it's a good idea. Here's the really nefarious thing about passive management in particular too. Think about, let's say Larry, because he's doing a favor for Janet Yellen or Bill Clinton or whatever, right? He starts pushing this stuff. He starts to push the corporation to make bad decisions, right? Well, because everyone else that's a S&P 500 passive fund manager owns the same things he does. There is no differentiation between, like, if he does something bad to Coca-Cola, it doesn't affect his holdings any worse than it affects everyone else's Coca-Cola holdings, right? So when people say like this is one of the objections he got on the right, it's like, well,
you're coming to the mic again. You're losing. Sorry. You're getting
Any better?
Yeah.
If he does something deleterious to the company, it doesn't affect his holdings any worse than anyone else's. And that was one of the things we had to fight against when we first started pushing back on the right more than the left. We would get, well, if ESG is really as bad as you say, won't the market take care of this? Like, won't people say, like, I don't want to put my money in an ESG fund? Well, the problem is all BlackRock funds are effectively ESG funds. Like, if you give him $1, he's going to use the dollar to push net zero or DEI or whatever. You heard it from his own mouth, right? So the issue is there's not going to be a huge performance differential because everyone owns the same stuff. So, like, I could be the most hardcore dollars and cents. It's all about the money. And I own 3% of Coca-Cola over here. And Larry owns 9%. And he wins. And he talks them into doing something stupid. The stock goes down the same amount for both of us. Right? So he doesn't really have to worry about the outcomes. Right? He's worried about his persona and BlackRock's image. And up until we started running ads against him, which we never really got to. I'm happy to talk about that, especially from a marketing perspective. I'd love to chat about that part. We never really got to it on the Good Old Boys podcast. But until we really started highlighting this for consumers, which is our main job is consumer education, people weren't like, there was no way for the average person to know like why this was happening. So he was getting away scot-free. He was getting to do favors for Mnuchin and Janet Yellen, Bill Clinton and Chuck Schumer or whatever. And the average Republican didn't have any idea, or the average person even, just what's a BlackRock? Like, what does that even mean? And he really lucked out there naming it after Blackstone because, like, it's a hard, like, people even get the firms confused, right? So he really covered. I think we did polling when we first started, and, like, don't quote me on this because it's been years since I looked at it, but, like, I think the name ID was like 14%, and then we had like a follow-up question, like multiple choice, like what does this company do? And I think only got like maybe 5% knew what it could correctly say what it was. So you're talking about 1/20th of the population even understanding what BlackRock did. So yeah, but the people who knew about power, right? The people, the insiders, they very much knew and knew they needed to keep him happy or at least keep him following order.
Well, but it sounds like what you're saying is actually a little bit Yarvinian, in the sense that you're saying it's actually not. You're saying that he's basically responding to power, and that he's just sort of, he really is a middleman between the Dems and the banks and the companies, and he's just like, well, this is what the Dems want, and I'm kind of a Dem, and I'm, hanging out with the people I hang out with in New York, and they're saying to do this, so, like, I'm just going to do it, right? Yeah. Like, that's kind of what you're saying.
No, there's absolutely some truth to that. And that's what I was kind of getting at with the sovereign wealth funds, for example, of Japan and Norway, saying that they'd only use asset managers. They weren't the only ones to do that. The New York City comptroller, the one that's threatening Mayor Adams right now, he's a lunatic. He said the same thing. You're only going to manage New York's money if you use everyone's money. The problem is that states like Kentucky, Florida, Texas, all the red states didn't say anything. So, like, they weren't like, whoa here. Like, we see what's going on. And so no one objected. So it was basically all offense, and there was no one pushing back defensively to say, no, you have to stick to your fiduciary duty. Now, I don't want to let him off the hook too much here because I don't totally buy the Yarvin. Like, it gets a little close to, like, full-on libertarianism for me, where people are just like homo economicus and they there's no room for like people's personal character. Right. If you tried to pay me to like screw over my neighbor, I'm not taking the bribe, and you could even threaten me. You'll find me in a ditch because I'm not going to like I this gets like religious, but like I'm a Christian. I have I answer to God when it comes to like taking care of my neighbor. So there's a higher purpose. I'm not saying I'm perfect or that I do everything right. But there are things you could not get me to do, period. Like, you put a gun to my head, I'm not going to do it. So it doesn't entirely, like, let Larry off the hook to say that he was getting pressure from a bunch of different entities, including his own customers, right? That's not an excuse to do what he did. And one thing we haven't touched on is the number of ways this violates the law. And it does violate the law, and he's being sued for that. So... Again, like, I'm sure, you respond to incentives too. Like, if a new customer calls you up and says, hey, I've got a real big project and I'm going to pay you, 3 times rate, you'd be like, great, I'll do that project. That's responding to an incentive. But if he said, yeah, the project is to get as many kindergartners to think that they're trans and chop off their genitalia, like, is there an amount you would accept for that? Like, is it like, I don't know you that well, but like, I listened to your podcast for years. Like, I don't get the feeling that you would take it. There's no amount of money that you would take, right?
that's kind of why it's like I'm a Yarvinian on it in some ways, and I'm a Yarvinian in it not. I think you're right. I mean, I think actually in a really, really practical sense, you're correct that this pressure, and this is what BAP would say, this is what Yarvin would say, and BAP has actually literally responded to me specifically about Larry Fink and said exactly this, which is, it's not Larry Fink. It's Larry Fink would be gone in 2 seconds if he said certain words, right? Is I think what BAP said, and that always really stuck with me because I was like, is that true? And I understand that's kind of half of this is. It is true that he's responding to pressures and he's doing, it's just kind of this whole giant Borg that's pulsing in the same direction and all that.
Yeah, and that's... Oh, sorry, I didn't cut you off.
On the other hand, my response to that has always been like, well, so what? You know, who cares? Let's still hold him responsible. Like, okay, you're okay, well, fine. Maybe he is a coward who's just doing whatever and doesn't actually think about what he's doing. But then you're going to be the guy. If you're going to hold yourself out to hold $11 trillion in funds,
right?
Yeah, well, sorry, maybe it's not exactly you, but you're going to be the guy who's going to be responsible for it.
Right. Exactly.
Like we're still going to hold you responsible for it, even if it's not you. Somebody's got to be held responsible for it. And, I think that that's kind of what we've learned, right? I mean, what's been so great about this administration is that, and Yarvin said, I was wrong, which is like, well, yeah, maybe it's not really these people's fault, but they're still the ones doing it. So, somebody's got to be held responsible for it,
Well, and it's like, even if you take, let's say go full Yarvin and people are just billiard balls, right? Like they are objects, according to Newton's laws, and they move according to like the forces being applied to them. Like, that actually means you should hold Larry even more accountable, because what you're saying is the only way to change things is to apply a counter force and get him to go into the pocket you want him to go into instead of the Democrats.
Exactly, right, because he needs to be forced. Exactly.
Yeah,
he needs
by his own admission, right? Behavior. Exactly. It's kind of projection, right? Like behavior only change when they're forced.
And that's what you're doing. And that's what you're doing.
And that's the business we're in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how are you doing that? Let's hear about the forces. You don't have to go so super deep into all the really specific, the three things, but just in a nutshell, what do you guys do?
So our organization exists to inform consumers about the issues important to them and amplify their voice in the marketplace. And so one of the things that we do towards that is we run what we call our Consumers First initiative, which I know is just a bunch of like jargon, but like it's an ongoing multi-million-dollar ad campaigns attacking woke corporations and woke companies and woke organizations that push this nonsense instead of focusing on their consumers. Because as we saw with potentially this Delta flight, I mean, obviously the facts are not out, all the normal disclaimers, but it would appear that the push for this sub airline that contracts with Delta to get like all female crew may have led them to put someone in there who wasn't ready, right?
Well, I think it was marketing. Wasn't it kind of like, so I actually wanted to really hang them up on that, but I thought it was going to be an all female airline, but it's like a subset of that airline that was sort of like a marketing thing.
Like Delta has a subcontractor, and I can't remember the name of it. But they
even that isn't exactly.
Oh, it's not even that. Okay, I got it.
It's not that isn't all female. It's just they had a stupid. It's very similar to Bud Light. They had a stupid marketing thing that was like unmanned flights. Like this is one of our flights happens to have no men on it. But it's like I'm sure if you actually went in and looked at it, they would be hiring all women.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't. Sorry, to be clear, I wasn't accusing them of not having any male pilots, but just that they had clearly used a DEI type advertising that sometimes.
For sure.
You will go onto our planes and there won't be any men manning it. And they thought that was something to brag about, which is just sort of odd because it's like you would never do that in any other, right? Like all Samoan airline, right? Like there's only Samoans on here. It's just an odd thing to brag about.
What you'd need to prove, again, is that was evidence of the discrimination, right? You'd have to say that the same people that made that stupid marketing campaign were also actually actively discriminating against men inside the company, right? One would have to serve as evidence of the other.
Yeah, for a lawsuit. I'm not suggesting that that they're like legally culpable because of that. My point was just that companies that go woke tend to be distracting from issues at the company. And our ad campaigns highlight those problems and explain that this company's probably going woke because of these other issues. I'll give you an example. Ticketmaster, which is a company that we hit, Do you remember at like the high point of like the election integrity legislation fight, like with Georgia and Texas, and they were saying this is Jim Crow 2.0, and they took the Major League Baseball game out of Atlanta and took it to Denver, I think, in Colorado. There was this big front one-page ad in the New York Times that all these corporations had signed on to defend democracy, and it was an extremely thinly veiled attack on this legislation. Like everyone knew what it was about because there were all these companies going after it. And Ticketmaster signed on to that, which is a really ballsy thing for a company who just had to plead no contest to felony charges with the DOJ and pay a massive fine for hacking into their competitors, right? For them to be doing. But the reason that you would think, well, look, why would you risk that? Why would you be self-righteous when you're like basically admitting to being a criminal organization, right? It is the reason, right? They got a call from, I believe, Kenneth Chenault, the former CEO of Amex, who seems to be at one point behind a lot of this. And this was all reported by Andrew Sorkin. They got a call, and they obviously, because they are vulnerable, because they had done things wrong, they don't need the New York Times writing about how they didn't sign on. They don't need Washington Post questioning their politics, right? So it's actually a way of covering their misdeeds, the skeletons that they have in the closet. And so the strategy here is to, okay, fine, if you're going to try and use wokeness to cover up those things, we're actually going to run multi-million-dollar ad campaigns highlighting those things. So we're going to diffuse, like we were talking about billiard balls, like, okay, there's an incentive to go woke, to hide. Well, we're going to make a disincentive to go woke because it's actually you're going to be playing Russian roulette with catching a 7-figure ad campaign, right?
Yeah, which basically you guys are doing, Rufo is doing, Starbuck. Right. What do you think of old Robbie Starbuck?
Yes.
Yeah, what's
the name?
What's the difference between what you guys and good old
So
Starbuck?
we started a little earlier. We were in 2021. Robbie has one thing at his advantage, which he's a massive Twitter following, which I'm very envious of, but in a friendly way. I think
You'll get there.
Absolutely great guy. So he doesn't actually run ads. He just puts out basically a dossier. And the way he operates is he'll call the company beforehand and say, here's what I have on you. I can either report that it's still happening or that it used to happen but doesn't anymore. And a lot of time he's gotten some major wins off of that. And to be clear, like, we're friends. Like, this is not like, there are differences in the way we operate, but none of this is like, I'm not trying to be like, and he does it this way and that's bad. I do it. Like, it's all good. We're all comrades in arms. One of the things that we are trying to do is we hit retail brands. We've run ads against American Airlines. That was my favorite because I kind of got the CEO fired.
Really?
Tenure cut short. Yeah, he was supposed to be on for like another 24 or 36 months. And after he jumped into the Texas election integrity fight. And we heard from one of their top lobbyists later that he didn't ask the board before he spoke on behalf of the corporation. And the board was already furious with him. And then when we ran his ads about how American Airlines is the worst airline in America, they were like, yeah, we just got a $4.5 billion bailout for the government, and we're probably going to need another one. So before you have to go before Congress again, you will be a lame duck. And about a week before the Department of Transportation had him in for a hearing in November of 21, he was announced to be leaving. He went to the hearing, but he was at that point not going to be. So I wasn't there. I heard it secondhand from one of their lobbyists, but I feel. Hopefully we had a significant impact in curtailing his career because he was a horrible CEO.
So where do the ads run?
So we always run them national. Well, I should say that. Depending on the brand, we will run them nationally. It depends on who will take them. Sometimes Fox even would have to turn us down because they had existing contracts with Coca-Cola and stuff like that. We would run them on Newsmax or some lesser, I don't say lesser. That's giving you a lot of trouble.
And they're just they're like anti ads. It's just an anti-cola.
The best way to describe them. Imagine if someone cut an anti, the campaign ads that you see that go after a candidate. Yeah. Imagine if someone cut that against the CEO of Coca-Cola.
Dude,
right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. These are not I will say this, sometimes people would come to me with the best high concept. You should do this ad that mimics this ad that they did, and it'll cut. And I hate to say it, but it's waste of time. The best ads were the most simple, gimmicky. This CEO sucks. Here's why he sucks. This company sucks. Tell Coca-Cola, focus on your customers, not woke politicians. That it's like the simplicity is actually the beauty of it, and like
they
all the
say
fun stuff you want to do actually isn't worth the time.
In my industry, they say ugly sells. And it's ridiculous because why would that be? But it's true that in certain sectors, when you need to make certain points, it's like the uglier the better.
You just want to be frank and up,
Yeah,
like,
you just want to be very, here, buy this, buy these pills.
Exactly.
So
we also would run them in the local media market for their headquarters. So like for Nike, I think they're out in Seattle, so we ran them hard in Seattle. American Airlines is in Dallas, so we do that. We would usually geographically do some sort of like geofencing. Like I always hammer their headquarters so their employees are getting a bunch of the ads on their phones. And then we'll usually do a mobile billboard out in front of their headquarters or something like that. With Coca-Cola, we did a bunch of regular billboards out in front of all their bottling plants, because one of the things that company had done is send out an email to their employees with all this DEI crap. And one of the advice to be anti-racist was try to quote unquote be less white. So we did the polar bear, try to be less white.
Yeah, I remember that. How did you get into this, man? This is like my dream job. This is like the best job I've ever heard. You went to Georgetown Law.
I did. I'm a lawyer by training, and then I was in politics for a while and ended up. I had a weird other life working for something called the Philanthropy Roundtable, trying to increase the marriage rate and decrease the out-of-wedlock birth rate and increase church attendance. But then I got hooked up. I was kind of interested in ESG in my own, like I just found it interesting. And I was working at some place called the Federalist Society, which some people may have heard of. It's sort of like a legal think tank kind of thing. And I would not shut up about ESG. And there were some people there that knew the trustees of Consumers Research that said, hey, you guys are looking for a new executive director. Like, you should talk to Will. And so I, talked to them and was like, hey, I think ESG could be the next big thing in consumer protection. Look at all this bad stuff that's happening because Larry Fink is pushing this wokeness, and like people are wondering, walking around wondering why all these corporations keep poking their own customers in the face, and this is why. And so it was sort of just like, you. And so I spent a year. I actually took over the organization on the first day of the COVID shutdowns, and I basically just spent a year like in a cave, just learning about all the minutia and talking to like executives that would, talk to me quietly about how this works and kind of
when was that?
What's that?
When was that?
This was like 2020. And then in 2021, we kind of figured out the game theory of like how we wanted to go after these companies and how we wanted to affect it. We always knew we were going to go after BlackRock, but we wanted to kind of make a name for ourselves first by going after like Coca-Cola and Nike and MLB and stuff like that. And so we started with those campaigns. And then in October of 2021, we started going after BlackRock. And we've consistently, there's sometimes companies will just hit like once and then we're done. I often, by the way, though, like my whole thing is like game theory and psychological warfare. So if you've been hit by, first of all, if you're doing anything woke, you can be hit by us. If you've been hit by us, that doesn't mean we won't hit you. We just ran a billboard against Coca-Cola 3 years later because I'm like, you know what? Just remind them that we could hit them any day. Like they could wake up any morning and get hit. And then I started thinking of like, okay, I don't just want the CEOs to think they can get hit. I want the boards of directors to know that they can get hit. And it's funny you mentioned Duke Energy as an example earlier. I had on my list, I wanted to hit a publicly traded utility and a board of director. And I got an opportunity to do that. And so if you actually go, I think the website's still up. If you go to Rebuke Duke, you will find our Rebuke Duke campaign. Rebuke Duke.
I think I remember this. I think I saw this.
And we hit them. One of their board members that's super woke was speaking at a conference of boards of directors. And so we put a mobile billboard attacking him in front of the Rebuke Duke Energy with all their woke stuff.
I see it.
They were paying to trans kids too. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'll get sued. They were paying to put transgender ideology in front of young children.
Sad.
It's very sad. These DI
very
departments
cool.
are cancerous. So like basically I'm in like a psychological warfare like guerrilla marketing
great, man.
campaign. The other thing I'll just note, that's about half of what we do. The other half is then taking that momentum, that anger that people righteously have against these companies and trying to talk with elected officials about what they can do to tear down all the supporting scaffolding, like all the ESG stuff we talked about, the asset managers, the proxy advisors, even the banks in a lot of circumstances, to push back on that and to tear this down. And to be clear, I am not taking credit for Robbie's hard-won victories, but so that when people like Robbie Starbuck or us come up against these companies, they're pushing on an open door more and more because there's not the protection from Larry Fink and State Street and Vanguard and ISS and Glass Lewis. That stuff, if we can get those people on their back heels, then when Robbie hits PepsiCo like he did today, they're going, Larry's not coming to my anymore. He's gone.
Right,
I'm on my own here. So it makes it easier to cave in all that nonsense.
Wow. I really do think so much of it really changed with Bud Light.
Yes.
Because, and I wrote about this a lot at the time, and because that seemed incontrovertible. Like they didn't have the excuse that this was good for business anymore.
Right.
They could not with a straight face.
Nothing,
because it hit the revenue. That was why every other previous one of these, like, I hate when people call it a boycott because it wasn't a boycott.
Yeah.
But
we have a no boycott policy. It is not our
good.
job.
Yeah. That's like the worst.
Yeah.
It was a gay cot, which was that, the Mexican guy who drinks three of these things on the construction site every day was like, I think I'm good. I can just buy the identical beer directly next to it in the store.
Right.
It's in marketing we call that preference marketing. It's like that you have these identical things in the grocery store. How do you just tip it slightly? That was like a huge tip. It was like, all right, well, I'm not buying that.
Yep.
And it was the revenue that did it, because every other time it was like, oh, they lost. Before that, it was always like, we boycotted Nike and they lost $800 million. And it was like, no, the stock price went down for like 3 days and then went right back up. They didn't lose any money.
Yep.
Whereas with Bud Light, you could not deny the revenue. The revenue was down, just plummeted. And that was like, all right, well, we can't hide this anymore. Like, we can't pretend like this isn't there. Right?
Yeah, and they lost on the rankings too, like from a market percentage when you're going from like the number
market
one beer.
Cap,
even the revenue is important. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, that's the whole reason you have a business. But like that too was like, now they're the second beer in America. Now they're the third beer in America. Like those were horrible. I mean, the brutal headline.
Exactly, and that's why. But the strangest thing in the world, and this is what the thing I think that gets to the real problem, is that woman, Alyssa Heinerschneid, should have had to, definitely not be in marketing anymore. Whereas I think she now has some job doing marketing for some other big company, and it's just like, what? And that's really
this is one of the reasons I love your podcast, because like I get to see it from some of the marketing side, and you talked about, so much of marketing. If I am not correct about this, please correct me. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you're saying that like a lot of it is spent as like perfunctory. Like Coca-Cola just has to put Coca-Cola on everything to just remind you that Coca-Cola exists. The actual like marketing, the marginal difference between this banner and that banner is not that huge, right? It's the point is like Coca-Cola in your face, Coca-Cola, right? And so a lot of these jobs become sinecures. It doesn't really matter that the person, and like they really blow it like this woman did, you can kind of fit her in. She'll like write some copy, right? And if there's enough of a patronage network remaining, they can reward people even when they've blown it for being loyal to the system, right? It's like, how many of the people have you ever read Days of Rage about all of the all the crazy bombers, right? They're all professors, right?
Yes.
Like Bill Ayers is like probably has a pension that you and I are paying for, right? So like, so if you can create that kind of patronage network, then you can actually reward people for taking a risk like that, right?
Yes.
And so you have to destroy at some level the entire thing, because if somebody can blow up Budweiser but then still have a job, they're going to keep blowing up Budweiser.
Exactly.
You have to make it so there's nowhere for them to go. Now that's one of the great things about Doge is they're flooding the system. Like these USAID people, if they'd have fired 5% of them, they'd all just got jobs at the places that get the USAID money. But they fired all of them and they cut the money off. So there's no, like, they're in real trouble because of what they've been up to.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing. I know that sounds grandiose. Like, how are you going to like deflate the whole marketing industry? But I mean, we've seen in the comments. I just want to acknowledge this person up here who said some very wise things. I think we've shown over the last 4 years, you can actually make some big changes. I mean, we've collapsed the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero.
Wait, what did they? It's only one commenter. What did they say? Which one?
They were saying that. at the very, very beginning, it actually came out. We didn't get to talk about this, but one of the ways that they push their message is what they call corporate engagement. So BlackRock will have stewardship meetings with these companies and tell them what they want them to do. So it's basically Larry's out there on DealBook.
The stewardship meeting.
Yes,
that's another
Susie
one.
Wells or whatever is like meeting with. I think Sandy Boss is the woman. What about determinative nominalism, right? Sandy Boss, I think, is the name of the woman who at one point was the head of stewardship for BlackRock. She's the one who actually needs to view the executive or view the board and says, like, here's what we have to do. And they just announced that there's an SEC rule change in the new SEC that comes down harder on this stuff. That they are like.
Wait, your mic is screwed up again.
Oh, sorry. Is it better? They've just announced, because of a rule change that the SEC just made, that they are going to temporarily suspend all corporate engagement. Meaning they are BlackRock is not currently meeting with corporations, which is like, that would be like if Coca-Cola said they were suspending their marketing spends for like.
So here's the comment. So what actually happened with the SEC here? And then I got to go in 3 minutes.
In the last 4 minutes, we're going to go real deep dive into SEC regs. So I'll make it real quick. So there are regulations that prevent hostile takeovers from happening in the market surreptitiously. And the rule is that when you acquire 5% or more of a company, you have to report that publicly to the SEC, but it's on a database, so the whole market sees it. Now, there's two kinds of those reports, or I should say there's at least two. Maybe there's weird, nuanced ones that I don't know about, but there's two main ones. One is Schedule 13G. G is in garage, right? That is when you're a passive investor, you're not doing anything, you're just very rich, right? You're a big, huge company, and you get over 5%. You just have to let the whole market know you're a big player. The other kind is Schedule 13D. D is in dog. And you have to file that, I kid you not, when you're, according to the statute, trying to influence or control the company. This has not been being enforced against BlackRock, obviously, right? They should have been having to file these all the time. And even worse for them, right? Even if you don't individually, let's say you own 4% and your buddy owns 1%, and you have like an agreement that you're going to try and influence the company, that gets added together and you collectively have to file, right? And you have to tell the whole market what you're up to, and you have to tell them like the meetings you took and how letters you sent and everything like that. That, for obvious reasons, because Gensler, a Democrat, was in charge of the SEC, has not been being enforced during this whole thing. Now, there were other reasons under Trump before that I won't go into because I don't want to piss off the people that were there. But that wasn't being enforced then. On February 11th, like 9 days ago, the SEC just put out new informal guidance. This isn't like the law, but it's like a cop saying like, hey, you've been jaywalking here. I keep seeing you jaywalk here. I'm not arresting you, but you need to cut it out because the next time you do it, there will be consequences. They issued informal guidance saying that moving forward, they're going to take Schedule 13D more seriously. And a Financial Times just wrote yesterday that this has gone off like a nuclear bomb with the asset managers. And two of them, Vanguard and BlackRock, have both completely suspended their corporate engagements because they're worried that they're about to get like caught doing this. And so I want to make one point here. I don't want to paint too overly triumphant of a picture because I think that's the big danger we're at right now in the fight. Is it feels like the walls of Jericho are coming tumbling down and it's over, like it's all done in one big. These people will be back at it the moment.
In some way, they're going to find out. Well, but so final question. If we still are not really in the answer of. I mean, I think the work Rufo has done and similar people, Local Distance have done to understand critical theory and how critical theory seeks to undermine everything. And it's all about undermining thing after thing after thing. And that's how you prevent fascism. And that's really the whole goal here. And with Shahulu marching left, that's kind of part of the reason. But even when we say they're going to get back to it, get back to what though? Because if really this was all about power the whole time, and they don't have power anymore, why would they get back to it? Like what do you think is really going on in Larry Fink's mind right now? Last question.
I think, and I'm going to use an analogy here that I'm using. I want to note that I'm using an analogy so I don't get sued for defamation. It would be a little bit like what we dealt with in the 90s with the mob, right? Or up through the 90s, I should say, with the mob in New York. that I mean, I'm sure there's still organized crime. Don't get me wrong. But that was sort of the last hurrah, right? That's when Mayor Giuliani really went after the last remaining families, right? And just nuked them. At least that's my understanding, right? You could say that what's stopping someone from like reforming the Italian mob now, right? Like Rudy Giuliani's retired. Like the new guy's kind of, the new guy's a cop, so maybe not, but certainly under Blasio, like he's a joke, right? But the problem is like there's inertia to organizations and to patronage networks and to mafia networks, right? And it's hard to go from zero to nothing. Like the reason the Italian mob formed is because there was all of these interpersonal connections between immigrants who are moving here, right? And as those break down, they're very hard to reform.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I would say that if we can get to the point where we've broken the patronage network, the DEI patronage network, the net zero patronage network, if we can break these down, even though there's no literal reason why they couldn't be reformed in the future, it's going to be a lot more difficult than just like turning the dial back up to 10. Like, hey, the coast is clear. Now, that doesn't mean we absolutely do need to make structural changes so this can never happen again. I think antitrust enforcement, which I hope to see coming out of FTC over the INSAM stuff that I keep mentioning, that's a huge thing. Like knowing that both parties take this seriously will go a long way towards that. But that's basically what we're dealing with here. It's not that like organized crime is now impossible in America, but we don't deal with like Michael Corleone anymore because those networks have just like the people that were important and put in jail, and the bodegas got used to not having to pay protection money, and the casino, like Las Vegas, got taken over by corporations. Like it's just sort of moved on. And I do think there's a world in which we break up BlackRock's control of corporate America through enforcement of securities fraud, antitrust, and fiduciary duty laws. And no one's going to be able to cobble this together again because people are going to know how it's done and they'll jam it the minute someone starts again.
It's a very good analogy. But let's hope we don't miss them like we missed the mob, because Vegas was way better before it was Disney-fied.
Yeah.
And so was New York City. So, we missed the mob. So let's not hope we miss this mob. And I don't think we will.
Well,
at least
I don't think
people like you and I won't. People like you and I won't.
It's less stylish than Larry Fink enforcing DEI quotas on the board. So like, I don't think we'll miss. He's not. I guess somebody in 50 years, someone will get, say what you want about Larry Fink, but he gave us Maroon 5, the classic.
Say what you will, but we got what does Ta-Nehisi Coates say? He goes, for 8 years we had the presidency. That's what the trannies will say. They'll say for 10 years we had. But it's gonna get. Hopefully, it'll get better for people like you and I, because we're the ones who get screwed by all this. Okay, dude, thank you so much. I'll send people to your account and to your to the consumer research account, and very, very cool stuff, man. And hey, let me know if you guys need any organic social work.
Absolutely.
Because I'm here. This is
I'm
what my
very,
agency
I'm very
does.
glad
This
you
is
reached
what
out
we
and
do.
connected, because I honestly, it did on my list of things to do to figure out a way to get to you. So very serendipitous.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Take care.